talking about diversity of the neurons, because they are not all the same. They don't look the same. They don't act the same. So we'll talk briefly about the diversity of the neurons. The first way I wanted to describe it is through their functionality. So with my neuron, I have three kind of general functions that I can put them together in. The first is a sensory neuron. And my sensory neurons are primarily going to go in to the CNS. And so we refer to these as afferent. Because see this affer, think about affect, right? Think about the verb. I am affecting my central nervous system. And so we have lots of different types of sensory neurons with lots of different ways of communicating different types of signals. And when we talk about different receptors, we can talk about how those sensory neurons with those receptors communicate to the central nervous system to decide what's going on. When they get to the central nervous system, we have what's called an interneuron. Interneurons are going to be our processors. So there's many ways that interneurons can work, right? So you could have a sensory neuron, go to an interneuron, and that interneuron could go straight to a motor neuron, which we'll talk about in a second. Or, which is probably more common, a sensory neuron tells an interneuron something, and that interneuron will go talk to another interneuron, right? So let's say I felt something hot, I sent that to my spinal cord, say, hey, it's hot, and then it's going up to the brain to say, hey, it's hot, and then the brain can send another signal down, and eventually we can get to a motor neuron. So that last one right there is that motor neuron. These are out of the CNS, and so we refer to these as efferent because they have an effect, right? So the effect of talking to my central nervous system. Again, this is a little bit oversimplified. And just like with sensory, there are many different types of motor neurons with many different functions depending on what part of the nervous system they're talking to. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the diversity of shapes and structures. And this is a little bit oversimplified in categories. There are so many different types of neurons with different names, different functions, and their shapes do dictate a lot of it, but we'll just kind of talk about a few of them. So the first shape, if we've got our little neuron here, our little cell body, we've got tons and tons of dendrites. We refer to these as anaxonic, where they do have a neuron, they do have an axon, but it's indistinguishable from the dendrites. And you can think about kind of the function of them, right? Because my dendrites are my ears, so they're particularly good listeners. They hear and process lots and lots of different signals, right? So we receive signals all throughout this cell, and then it can send a nice simple signal with its little axon. The second type, right, is I've got one nice dendrite, cell body, one nice axon, D, C, K. These are referred to as bipolar neurons. They are probably the most rare, and they are associated with our special senses. And when I say special senses, I mean the 5 senses that you learned about when you were a kid. So seeing, smelling, tasting, hearing. The one exception I might say is except for touch. Touch is going to be a little bit more complex than that. But think about the types of signals that you receive in your eyes, right? I get a specific wavelength. That specific wavelength gets communicated down, and then it has one very simple signal of, hey, this wavelength is this amount. It got stimulated or not. Or I tasted chocolate or I did not. It's a more simple signal. The third type is the kind that you guys are the most familiar with. we call these multipolar, where we have many dendrites and a clear axon. Sometimes the axon can even split, and when they split, we refer to that as bifurcating. These are the more complex neurons because they're receiving lots and lots of information, but it's also communicating some very clear signals from the lots of information, and sometimes even going into multiple areas. Again, this is the most common of the neurons that you're going to see. The last one, right, is we've got an axon, and we've got dendrites, and then we have the cell body hanging off on the side. We refer to these as unipolar because it looks like one continuous axon with the cell body hanging off to the side. These are particularly good for fast signals that don't need a lot of processing. Because, again, sometimes we need to have signals that just go out. Things like pain need to get communicated, right? If I chop off my arm, I need that information to my brain right away so I can deal with it. But anyway, those are the 4 shapes. Those are the 3 general functions, and you will see a mixture of these within the different categories. So you will often see lots of anaxonic neurons as interneurons and so on and so forth. So don't think of them as completely separate. They do fit together as one big category.